Welcome back to the podcast. This is Joanna. And if you are one of our regular podcast listeners, you know that we took off last week. It was because I was hosting Become a Referral Magnet every day of the week, and it was amazing. But we took the week off, and I'm really excited to be back here with you. And I'm a little nervous for today's episode because what I want to share is really vulnerable today. And it's straight from my heart and my depths. And I just really want to make sure that I articulate it and express it in the ways that I really want to. I'm going to be sharing kind of a mix of some personal updates with lessons for you on life and coaching and business and being with other humans in this incredible, beautiful mess that we call life. And the episode today is going to touch on lots of different things. We're going to talk about grieving and grieving rituals and navigating through loss, and a little bit about mother-daughter relationships, and a lot more. So much of this, I think, is so intrinsic to our humanity, and whatever is intrinsic to our humanity is also intrinsic to our coaching and to who we are as practitioners and to what we bring and how we show up with our clients. So, a lot of you probably know I am still in my season of loss. It's been just about 4 months since my mother passed away, the beginning of April, and I just can't even believe that so much time has gone by. And, people ask me all the time. I want to be able to answer this question of how am I and how have I been? And I want to be able to answer it quickly, but the truth is that the answer to that question is complicated. It's been complicated and it's layered. There are many, many, many days with tears and sadness and deeply missing my mother. I listen to voice messages from her that I saved just to feel more deeply connected. I try to remember what she looked like, what she sounded like, what she smelled like, because I'm just so worried that even though she's so present, in other ways, I'm worried that she's fading a little bit. And so I'm holding on as much as I can to my memories of her. Over these last months, I've also had moments of true and pure joy celebrating my mother and celebrating her life and her legacy and who she was. Over these last months, I've also had and been in a lot of honesty around who my mother could be for me and who she couldn't or wasn't able to be for me. And I've, of course, had that honesty for many years now. After somebody dies, sometimes there's this impulse to only look at, I don't know, what was favorable, we could call it, or just to kind of, whitewash it a little bit. And it's been really important for me, both in the eulogy that I gave at her funeral and then with myself over these months, to be really honest about the truth, the fullness of my relationship with my mother and who my mother was. And it was so many things, not one thing. These last number of months have also been hard in ways of holding space for my father, who is still incredibly bereaved. He's grieving really hard. And I've also had some worry that The time is going by too quickly. I don't want it to get further and further away in time from when my mother was alive and in my life in that way. Every day, every moment feels precious. And over these last almost 4 months, there have been a lot of moments of not thinking about my mother, like spans of time, hours and hours at a time of not thinking about my mother. And I know for some people after loss, that's not how it is. It's like thinking about the loss and the person that you've lost all day long, 24/7. But that's not me. I have been what I call a compartmentalizer for a very long time. And compartmentalizing, I see it as a skill, a really helpful, useful skill. And it's one that I learned starting when I was very, very young because my mother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 9. So starting from before 9, like starting from age 7 when she started getting sick, I had a sick mother. And it just got more and more and more intense over the years. And I learned pretty early on that I wasn't going to be able to function in life, that I wasn't going to be able to do what I set out to do in life, that I wasn't going to be able to enjoy and take pleasure in my life if I were to think about my mother 24/7. Also, through the years, she was in hospitals a lot. I spent, I don't even know how many collective hours and days over the years in emergency rooms, in ICUs, in hospital rooms, caring for her, being with her. And in those times as well, except of course when it was an acute emergency, but once I knew that things were leveling off a little bit, I had to figure out how to compartmentalize, how to keep on moving forward with my business, how to keep on being a parent, how to keep on taking care of myself. And I am just so grateful and thankful for this skill. It's how I've been able to navigate through my business and through my life all of these years, carrying all of this with my mother. And what I've really come to believe, especially over these last couple of years, is that compartmentalizing is actually an essential skill and an asset for when we're working with clients because stuff is going to come up in our lives, stuff is going to come up during our day, and yet we still are going to show up for our clients. Now, of course, I'm not talking about if you have a big emergency, of course you're going to cancel client sessions. And I'm not talking about invalidating yourself or denying your feelings, not at all. But what I am talking about is having the ability to compartmentalize, to be able, when appropriate, even when you've got a ton of mess going on in your life, to be able to put that aside, outside of the box, and step into the container of your client work and of your client session and be fully present to your client, right? To the human in front of you that you are there to serve and support. And that doesn't mean that I don't sometimes share about what's going on for me personally in my one-on-one sessions and in my groups. I will, but the compartmentalization is that In terms of my nervous system, in terms of my emotions, I am fully present with my client and regulated with my client, no matter what's going on in my life. This is one of the things that we look at deeply in the Sacred Depths Transformational Practitioner certification and training because it is really a skill that we need. So, anyway, there's been, as I said, a lot of tears and sadness, a lot of all of it. And in the last few months, there's been this compartmentalizing. And what I want to share is that I've had some guilt about that these last few months since my mother died. I've had thoughts go through my head of, well, why aren't I sad even more often than I am? Why aren't I thinking about my mother more? Is it because I don't care enough about her? Is it because she's really fading away? And I've just had so many feelings that have come up around that. And of course, none of those thoughts are true. I know that. I know that I am and I was a very good daughter, and that the love and the bond and the relationship between me and my mother were so deep, and that my care and devotion for her were so strong. And I also know that some of these feelings of guilt about compartmentalization in the wake of my mother's death, they're actually really poignant indicators of some of my complicated relationship with my mother when she was alive. Because in true Jewish mother form, my mother, for as much as she loved, and for as amazing as she was also incredibly skilled at guilting others. She had this skill down. It was an art for her. And my mother, she required a lot. And she had high expectations. And my mother wanted a lot from me and from our relationship, and honestly, more than I could often give to her. And because of all of this, even though the love between the both of us was so strong and so clear and so true, it's also true that my mother often felt that I didn't care for her as much as she needed me to. And this still breaks my heart to this day that my mother felt a little neglected sometimes. Uh, I always just wanted so deeply for her to not only know how much I loved her, which she did, but for her to really, really know how much I was there for her. And, mother-daughter relationships, they can be so complicated, right? I think that mother-daughter relationships are some of the most complicated types of relationships out there sometimes. Some of the most beautiful relationships, the most loving, the most life-giving and meaningful, and also complicated for a lot of us. And I won't on this podcast episode get into all of the details and nuances and twists and turns of my epic relationship with my mother because we'd be here for hours and hours. And actually, over the last few years, I've written a memoir about this. Hopefully, one day I'll put it out there into the world. But for now, I want to share this piece. My mother had some trouble. And when I say some trouble, I mean a lot of trouble. My mother had trouble with me individuating. and becoming my own person. And one of the ways that she always really showed her love was by being in constant contact with me. In other words, she wanted to talk every single day, sometimes more than once a day. For her, part of loving, part of knowing that the relationship was really, really strong was being able to be in a lot of contact and know that she was in the center of things. And I share this a little bit because when it comes to coaching and when we're with our clients, we want to really understand what our histories are in terms of being attached to others, relationships, and what loving relationships looked like with others, because we want to make sure that we don't bring those misaligned patterns, those misaligned beliefs, those misaligned energetics into our client work and into our client containers. We don't want to bring any of those wounds in. And one of the things that, one of the many, many things I share in Sacred Depths, just around my own personal journey with client containers and energetics, is the first few years that I worked with clients, I was almost desperate to make sure that we would be in touch all the time. I would always check in, sometimes multiple times a week in between sessions. I would worry if I didn't hear back from clients right away. I would worry that they weren't really into the work or that I hadn't done a good enough job, all the things until, a couple years in, it hit me, oh my gosh, I'm bringing this pattern that I learned from my mother of being in constant contact in relationship. And in order to trust a relationship and in order to know that it's working really well, I'm bringing that pattern into my client containers. That is not gonna work, right? And I really, at that time, did the inner work around the fears and the beliefs so that I could be with my client in sessions and check in with them when it was appropriate, or be happy when they checked in with me in between sessions, but that I didn't need that constant validation, right? That we're okay, they're okay, I'm doing a good job. So I would really encourage you, we do deep work on this in Sacred Depths, but I would just encourage you, if you're listening to the podcast right now, to think about, are you bringing your attachment styles in relationships that are maybe misaligned, or beliefs or patterns or wounds from other relationships into your client coaching relationships? And if so, do the work to unwind that. I don't want to throw too much shade on my mother's way of being in constant contact. And so, what I will also say is that even though it was misaligned, it didn't always work, and it shouldn't be in coaching containers, it did also teach me some incredible lessons about devotion and being deeply devoted to those that I care about. And this has become one of my superpowers that I use in all of my relationships, in all of my friendships, and in my client relationships. And I do this, though, without that clinging or need to be in constant contact. And I'll just share a little bit more about mother and daughter relationships. Um, like I said, they're always layered, or often layered, at least for me, and complicated. And Same goes for me as a mother. And I have two daughters. My regular listeners probably know this. My oldest one, Panina, is actually today she turned 17, if you can believe it. Today is her birthday, the day that I'm recording. And my younger daughter, Yael, is 11. And they are obviously both the centers of my universe, completely, completely, completely. And because of everything that I had been through with my mother, and because of all of the work I have done around it over the years, all of the self-awareness, all of it, I'm really hyper aware and intentional about how I show up as a mother. And I realized a number of years ago, now I'm about to make a bold statement, just go with me here for a moment. I realized a number of years ago that both from myself and from talking to so many mothers, whether they were friends or clients, that in one way or another, there's always just a little tad of narcissism embedded inside of motherhood. Just in the sense or in the impulse that we want so badly to be at the center of our kids' universes, that as mothers, so many of us, we want to be their home base forever, right? We want to be center for them. But of course, our jobs as mothers are to check that impulse and to support our kids instead to become their own people separate from us. The goal is ultimately for us to not be the centers of their universe, even if there's heartbreak for us inside of that joy and heartbreak, right? Such bittersweetness. And at least this is how I approach it with my own daughters. There's such joy in witnessing them grow up and individuate and become their own people. And I really like to think that I have really helped facilitate that process for them deeply to become their own people. And there is also heartache in it too. It's like I want to just squeeze the both of them all day long, keep them close, always be their go-to person, their most important person, which of course I also don't want to be because I know they need to keep on individuating and find their other go-to people. So, in the spirit of all of this, and by the way, I apologize if I'm a little disorganized in this episode today. It's such a personal one that kind of, moving a little bit from topic to topic, but I hope that it's valuable and meaningful for you. Anyway, in the spirit of this tinge of motherhood narcissism mixed with this job of allowing our kids to be their own people, I wanted to read a poem that I wrote about 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, when Panina was 12. I don't claim to be a great poet, but this is one that was really meaningful for me and meaningful for a lot of people when I shared it with them. And so I wanted to share it with you today. Here it goes. I miss the days when you were a permanent fixture on my lap. Your big blue eyes, too big still for your small face, directed at me fully, without gazing beyond. We were both younger then, at peace with the idea that our bubble was impervious to time, that I would always be the center of your world, and you mine. My heart is exuberant that your world has expanded exponentially, yet my body still aches for the feel of your sweaty, trusting hand in mine. You are of me but do not belong to me. A spin-off that is meant to have a storyline separate from the original. I promise to keep a candle lit in case you need to stop at home to pretend for a moment that the bubble never popped. You are my destiny, and I am just your history. Your wings are beautiful. You're using them well, better than I ever did. I'm a little embarrassed just because it kind of makes me teary even to read it after all these years. Anyway, to bring it all back to coaching and coaching skills, it takes big and deep inner work to unfurl beliefs like I need for my kids to keep me at the center of their lives. And no matter what kind of clients you work with, or what goals or subject matter you work with them on, this is part of our work with them to hold them to navigate those fears, to help them unfurl those unhelpful beliefs with wisdom and grace, and to learn more helpful beliefs and to learn how to get regulated with the fears. And so that brings us to the last part of what I wanted to share with you today, which is a little bit more in detail about what my grieving process has been like over these last 4 months, and some things that I've been doing and some practices that I've been doing. And first, I want to say this, and I've said this for many years, and I've taught this in trainings. In our modern culture, especially our Western culture, if we're in Western culture, we've really lost touch with being intimate with death and the dying process. And we've lost touch with grieving. Culture has removed us from all of it. It used to be that we were so much more intimate with the death process. Almost everybody would die at home if they were sick. Um, we don't have in our culture great practices or rituals around grieving and mourning. And I really believe that this is all to our detriment because death is a part of life. We can't have one without the other. And when we distance ourselves so much from the dying process and from intentionally grieving, it can really hurt us. It can have us be even more scared of death than maybe we already are. It can have us lose out on opportunity to deeply hold our loved ones through their last days and moments. My mother died on hospice care in her home, and those last weeks, I was there, and my father was there, and my sister was there with her 24/7, and we held her through the process. And while it was so painful, I'm also so glad that we did it, that we didn't shy away, that we didn't take her for a final hospital stint to die there. We were able to midwife that for her and for ourselves. I believe that it's a detriment to us to be so distanced from grieving rituals because then we don't grieve properly. Not that there's any one way to grieve. I don't mean that at all. But what I mean is that when we kind of don't lean in and don't allow ourselves to have grieving processes, the sadness, the grief, the loss, it can really get stuck in our bodies. It can create other problems and maybe other anxieties or depression, all of that. So I really believe that just culture as a whole, we're not getting it right now, and we need more rituals uh, around the grieving process. I teach one in my Into the Depths training, which is all about training on ritual and ceremony. And for many years, I was a celebrant, and I had the privilege of holding peoples and families through funerals and unveilings and all of that. Anyway, I had been, in some ways, anticipating my mother's death for decades. Like I said earlier, she first got diagnosed with multiple sclerosis when I was 9. And I've kept all of my diaries and journals since I've been a little girl. I've kept a journal since I've been 6. And so, I've gone back and looked at my diaries from around that time when my mother got diagnosed. And even then, even as a 9-year-old, I was concerned and semi-obsessed with my mother dying. And for all of the decades since then, I'm going to be 50 later this month, so that's many decades. For all of the decades since then, I always wondered how I would actually grieve when she did die. And I always wondered how I would actually move through it. And, I think I'm still early in my process, about 4 months in. I think there's still going to be, I know there's still going to be many twists and turns in the grieving and mourning process over this year and in the years to come. But I can share with you, and I want to, about what the process has been for me so far. In some ways, it's been really unexpected. Like I've been grieving in ways that I hadn't expected to grieve, and in other ways, not. And so, first, and this is kind of the unexpected surprise ways and parts, share with you a little bit about this. So, I'm not a religious person per se, but that being said, I am spiritual for sure. And I also really love tradition. But because I'm not religious, it's been kind of surprising to me that I've actually really, really relied on a lot of the Jewish grieving traditions these last months. Jewish funeral rites and other mourning and grieving rituals. And in the Jewish tradition, one thing I'll say is that they're really, really rich and meaningful and very purposeful and very intentional. The funeral and mourning traditions and grieving traditions, they're really geared towards supporting those who are left behind to be able to navigate the process and to navigate it with meaning and with connection. And I feel really grateful for that. And so I'm going to share a couple of these pieces. Um, Actually, I'm going to share sort of what's been the biggest piece for me. I have here in my notes to share lots of different things, but I think I'm going to just get straight to the point with this one. So, in Jewish tradition, when a parent dies, you're asked to say a prayer. The prayer is called the Kaddish for a full 11 months after the parent dies. And you're supposed to say it every day. Really supposed to say it a couple times a day, every day for a full 11 months. And I will tell you that never in a million years did I think that I would recite the Kaddish beyond at the funeral itself. And by the way, when me and my sister and my father did recite it at the graveside, as my mother was being lowered down into the ground, it was very, very moving. One of the things that I think are distinctive about Jewish funerals is that there is a closeness, a proximity to the death process, and those that are at the burial site are meant to bury the dead. So we don't leave it for the cemetery workers. We pick the dirt up in our hands or with shovels, and we do kind of this last kindness, this last good deed that we could do for the person that has died, and we put the earth on top of them. Anyway, back to Kaddish. I never in a million years thought that after the funeral that I would say Kaddish. It's not my thing to really do prayers or to go to synagogue very often. Uh, Although I do with my family, we do sometimes go Friday nights. But anyway, I out of nowhere felt called. I didn't think I would do this for the full 11 months. I just thought I would do it once. Out of nowhere, I felt called to do it. This was right after the 7 days of Shiva were over, and I felt myself compelled to go to synagogue and to show up and to say the prayers. And I think when I first went, what compelled me, at least on the surface, was that this Kaddish, which by the way means holy, or sanctified, that this prayer, this Kaddish, it was something that my mother had recited for her mother when her mother died. And it was something that her mother for a year recited for her mother when her mother died, and something that her mother recited for her mother, and so on and so forth through the generations. And there was something really special and meaningful about that to me. Also, I thought my mom would want me to say it for her. So those are the reasons that got me there the first time. But I'll tell you, that's not what has kept me going back these 4 months. And I've been going back not every day the last 4 months, but a number of times every week. Even though my life is so busy, even though I have 2 kids and a busy business, we just got a dog, like all the things, I still find myself going. And I'm going for a few reasons. Yes, because my mother said it for her mother, and so on and so forth. But I'm also going because that is a half hour that I know is reserved out of the day for me to be nothing else but a mourner and to be seen as a mourner. Life is so busy, there's so much going on. It is too easy to quote unquote move on after a week, after a month, right? And to be in the busyness. And I did talk about compartmentalizing before, and that is a fact. And it's also been important for me to compartmentalize my grief to make sure that I make time for it in that way. I get to go and have this time where I don't have any other responsibility other than to tend to my heartache and my feelings of loss and my grief. And there is something so sacred about that. And in the service, when it comes time for the mourner's Kaddish, those that are mourning, in mourning, we stand up. We stand up in front of everyone that's there, in front of the community, to say these words of the prayer. And it's my opportunity to just be seen in my grief and for nothing else, just for those moments. And right now, there's something so sacred about that. And it's really interesting. The prayer itself, you'd think it would mention the dead and the loss and all of that. It doesn't. There's not a word of it in the prayer. The prayer, I don't so much connect with the words of it. It's a lot of it is about glorifying God. Doesn't have that much meaning for me, but what does have meaning is I think the meaning behind it. So for me, the deeper meaning of this prayer and the reason why people that are mourning are commanded to saying it is because even in our grief, even through navigating the hardest of hard loss and times, even in being with death, we're also meant to remember the glory of life, the magic of life. We're also meant, and I love this about the tradition, we're meant to remember that being alive and in life is so important, even as we're mourning, even as we're grieving. In Jewish tradition, the first 7 days after somebody dies is called Shiva, and that's when we're deeply mourning, right? That's when maybe we're not necessarily asked to remember living and the joy of living. It's really more intensely devoted to the grief. But, once those 7 days of Shiva, of the intense mourning, are over, the tradition is your community helps you up and you leave the house. You leave the house for the first time in a week and you intentionally walk around the block. And the intentional walking around the block is about, yes, I'm still a mourner, but I am also celebrating and remembering that I am part of life. So I love this. So anyway, the Kaddish is one of the ways that I've been giving myself space to really grieve, but it's not the only way. Here are some of the more expected ways. These are more true Joanna, form, true Joanna form, I'd say ritualist form and deep diver form for me. So, one is that I've been writing my mother letters, uh, just when I want to connect with her, writing her letters about what she meant to me, what she means to me, how I miss her. I write her letters telling her what's going on in my life. I speak to her about the beauty of our relationship. I speak to her in these letters about the complications in our relationship. I say to her in these letters some things that I couldn't ever really say to her face when she was living. I mean, with love, but with so much truth. And this has been a really healing process for me. Um, a lot in my coaching work, I invite clients to write letters. that they're not going to send to people, whether they're angry letters or letters of love or grief or speaking their truth, whatever it is. And it's such a healing practice. So anyway, I offer that to you if you're listening. And then the other thing, which is also very Joanna style and involving somatics and energetics, is I put on music. This is kind of funny. You're learning a lot about me today. I put on music that I know makes me cry, that I know can activate and bring up the sadness. And I put on music and I do authentic movement, just in expression of the grief and the sadness as an offering to my mother and to my higher self. I move through it, I dance through it, and I have it really come from my core and my soul and my heart and my belly, and something very sacred and beautiful and meaningful to just have that space. Okay, I'm gonna end it here. I hope that this episode wasn't too rambly. I didn't script it out in the way that I usually script out so many of my podcast episodes. I wanted it to kind of be a little bit more raw. And I think I'll leave you with this. One of the biggest things that has been moving through me since my mother died, which is something that we all know, something that I've always known, but it's become so much more poignant these months, and that's that life is really precious. And my mother's death has had me recommit and more deeply commit to living my life well and with meaning and not sleepwalking through it, giving in to too much technology, really working to be as present as I can and open to as much pleasure as I can. And, we always need to take our own medicine. This is one of the things that I have for decades helped my clients with. And it's been really profound to bring it to myself as well. So, my dear listener, that is my reminder for you. Life is precious. Live your life intentionally, live it well, be present to the moments, and take as much pleasure in as you can. If you loved this episode and you feel it would touch someone else in your life, please feel free to share it. Nothing would make me happier than knowing that my process is helping and impacting and bringing value to someone else. And of course, I mentioned different coaching pieces in today's session. If you are looking in your client work to be able to sit in the shadows with your clients, to be able to help them navigate through grief, through loss, through the messiness of life, please consider joining us for Sacred Depths. It is a profound experience. I'll just leave it at that for now. All right. Thank you, my friends. Thank you for listening, and be back soon.